Higuruma is no Nanami clone. If you pay close attention to his story, you'll realize that there's many similarities between himself, Itadori, Gojo, and even Geto. After rereading the Higuruma dominant chapters, I understood why he's garnered such a passionate fan base. And I can't help but appreciate how much detail Gege Akutami put into the artwork and story of Higuruma, making him one of the most fleshed out side characters that we've gotten so far. His light and darkness tying in with the major themes we see throughout the series. Higuruma is exhausted, and I don't mean from the many long hours that he put into his criminal justice work, but instead, he's emotionally exhausted from the friction caused between his own deep empathy and his ability to deal with the grinding injustice of a broken system. While Higuruma presents himself mainly as someone who's concerned with getting to the truth, he still has a certain amount of empathy that he doesn't admit to. Blind justice and turning a blind eye don't work for Higuruma. While other members of the justice system are willing to look away from the truth and the suffering of the innocent, Higuruma instead keeps his eyes open and accepts the guilt and blame that comes with it. Those same eyes are unable to look at Itadori out of shame. But what we know, and possibly Higuruma as well, is that Itadori would never look at him in a judgmental light. And it could be this lack of blame that makes Higuruma feel even more ashamed. In chapter 166, there's a panel that really drives home this connection between Itadori and Higuruma. And it's how the author Gege Akutami uses the text bubbles that really drives this through. Itadori still claims some responsibility in the lives taken by Sukuna, saying, "Even so, it's my fault, because I'm too weak." The "because I'm too weak" speech bubbles showing up in a panel where we only can see Higuruma. Neither Higuruma nor Itadori can shrug off the weight of the lives that they felt responsible for, the lives that they took, and the lives they couldn't protect. Higuruma is far from a mentor to Itadori, and instead, it's Higuruma who finds lessons in Itadori and even forgiveness for himself. After Itadori claimed to be guilty for Sukuna's crimes, Higuruma was reminded of why he got into law in the first place. It wasn't just because he cared about truth. It was also because he believed in the goodness in people, and that light that shines within the people with that goodness in them might be able to combat the darkness. And maybe, just maybe, such goodness can rise above a broken, twisted system. I'm sure Higuruma can see the similarities between himself and Itadori. And so by meeting Itadori, it's like being able to observe himself as an outsider. To see the goodness in Itadori is like seeing the goodness in himself. That maybe he shouldn't carry so much weight and blame for the people that he could not save. There's this subtlety that I love so much in the writing and as well as the artwork. After the "because I'm too weak" panel, we get this tile here with a close-up of Higuruma's eyes, implying that he's contemplating something. This weakness isn't only applied towards the innocent, towards the people who sought out help and salvation from Higuruma, but also in himself, his inability to save others, his inability to do anything about a broken system. And by lashing out in violence, in destroying the people who he felt were destroying lives, he still didn't feel any better. So how might Higuruma find salvation? It's by connecting to Itadori, being able to make eye contact with him. And here comes another small detail that I love. When we first see Higuruma turn off his executioner's blade and he just is clutching on to the small cross, it's in response to realizing that Itadori, of course, is admitting to something that he was not truly guilty of. And so he didn't want to strike him down. And the next time we would see him do a similar gesture, shrinking down his cross, he would be passing it on to Itadori to use against Sukuna, the actual perpetrator. All the while, he's able to make eye contact with Itadori, Finally, no longer does he have any shame, and instead, he feels proud and confident in this baton pass to Itadori, entrusting him with the future. Someone who has the goodness that he carried inside himself, and now he can pass this light to someone who never lost their light. Now, what other characters does Higuruma share similarities to? Now, the obvious choice is Nanami, but I wanted to talk about a few other characters, including Gojo and Geto. Higuruma, Nanami, and Gojo all wanted to choose work where they could make the biggest impact, even if they'd be working harder or doing things that are rather inglorious and wouldn't have as much stability. Nanami was a successful salaryman who was able to earn so much money that he might be able to retire by his early 30s. But his work wasn't fulfilling. He was simply helping rich people get richer. And we see how this is not just physically but emotionally draining for him. But how does he feel rewarded? By helping out a humble baker. By relieving her shoulder pain, he was able to feel more accomplished than he did through all the money that he earned helping rich people. Gojo could have just been a successful sorcerer, but he decided to be a teacher, which he admits is something that he really wasn't suited for. But he knew he could make the impact that he wanted to see in the world, helping out young sorcerers and changing the Jujutsu world. Higuruma could have taken safer, easier cases, or he even could have become a judge. Even Higuruma's assistant notes how he isn't motivated by money. Like Gojo, Higuruma is a prodigy, and we even have this quote in 246 saying that he has talent equal to Satoru Gojo's. But the similarities don't end there. Even before becoming a sorcerer, Higuruma was considered a genius in the field of law. But despite his immense talent, he was not able to always save the people that he wanted to save, much like Gojo. Now for his similarities to Geto. Both of them had a strong sense of justice and could see ugliness in weakness. But unlike Geto, Higuruma didn't restrict himself to having empathy for one group nor hate towards another. Higuruma and Geto both suffered from unchecked mental health issues. They continued to push themselves to work harder in a system that was driving them towards madness. The beautiful tragedy of these characters lies in their drive to do good, and how those very morals would lead them down a dark and violent path. Their goals surrounded protecting people who suffered at the hands of cruelty, injustice, and ignorance. Initially, Higuruma says that he took some sort of pleasure out of taking the lives of those who slighted him and irritated him. But later, we see how he confides with him about how horrible it felt to take those lives. Despite how unjust or cruel they were, he couldn't shake off the weight of the lives that he took, to the point that he was ready to turn himself in, again because he had this large sense of justice and responsibility, similar to, of course, Itadori. And as of chapter 247, we see Higuruma repeat the words that Nanami had said in his final moments to Itadori. Itadori's tenacity and his inherent goodness are things that inspire them and gives them hope for the future. It's easy to understand why Higuruma has such a diehard fan base. It wasn't until I started looking more into his story after the events of chapter 247 that I truly began to appreciate and love Higuruma. Arguably, it's a bit late for that. But it was because I revisited these chapters that introduced us to Higuruma that I felt like I needed to make this video and share my appreciation for this character and the writing and artwork that Gege Akutami put into characterizing him. These ideas of weak versus strong, just versus unjust, and corruption, we've seen these all throughout the series before, and Higuruma ties them all together so nicely. And now Higuruma's light is passed on to the trustworthy hands of Itadori.